He disappeared without warning. There was no farewell, there were no signs. There wasn't that restlessness that animals usually show before big changes. He simply wasn't there anymore. You searched every corner of the house, called his name until your voice was hoarse, asked the neighbors, put up posters on the street. But deep down, from the first moment of absolute silence when you realized he wasn't coming when called, you already knew. He had left, never to return. Zeno of Citium taught that the universe is governed by the LOGOS, a divine reason that organizes every movement, every encounter, every separation, according to a logic that transcends our immediate understanding. Nothing happens in vain, he said. Everything follows the invisible order that keeps the cosmos in balance. And perhaps that's what you witnessed, not the inexplicable escape of an animal, but nature's precise response to a change that you yourself initiated without realizing it, because something in you changed, didn't it? Maybe it was subtle, imperceptible to your own senses, but deep enough to alter the frequency you emit. And he, guardian of the inner solitude that he always was, detected that your solitude had transformed, that you no longer needed to be accompanied in the same way, that your silence had found a different quality, less needy, more complete, less dependent on someone's presence to feel habitable. That's why he didn't run away. He obeyed. He obeyed the silent call of the universal order that determines when a being should remain and when it should move on, when a bond should be maintained and when it should dissolve so that both parties can evolve according to their own destinies. Nature makes no mistakes, Zeno observed. What seems chaotic to our limited perception reveals itself to be perfectly ordered when understood from the perspective of the whole. And perhaps his disappearance is not chaos, tragedy, or abandonment. Perhaps it is order, the invisible order that governs all encounters and all separations, determining that each being remains exactly where it should remain for the time it should remain. No more, no less. He didn't leave you. He simply recognized that your cycle had been completed, that his function in your life, accompanying your loneliness while you learned to inhabit it, had come to an end. And now, following the hidden harmony that governs all things, he answered the next call. What changed in you that even made the universe reorganize who should be by your side? There's something devastating about discovering that you've become someone who no longer needs to be accompanied in the same way, that you've evolved beyond the version of yourself that attracted his presence years ago. And that this evolution, however positive it may be, necessarily means leaving behind not only old versions of yourself, but also the beings that connected specifically with those versions. Because that's what happened, isn't it? You changed. Not dramatically, not in a way that could be easily identified by others, but deeply enough to alter the quality of your presence in the world. Zeno understood that the wise man grows according to the Logos, and the Logos reorganizes everything around the wise man according to that growth, not as a reward or punishment, but as a natural adjustment of reality to the new frequencies that emerge when someone genuinely transforms. And your cat, sensitive to the invisible frequencies you emit, was the first to detect that you are no longer the same person who needed his silent company to make loneliness bearable. That you've developed a way of being alone that no longer depends on witnesses. An ability to inhabit your own silence without needing someone to validate that silence through constant presence. This should be a cause for celebration. It should be recognized as an achievement. But it hurts because it exposes a truth that you prefer not to face, that growing always implies losses, that evolving means leaving behind not only limitations, but also the bonds that formed around those limitations. The Greek philosopher observed that the pain of growth comes from the resistance to accepting that our new nature demands a new reality. And perhaps that's what you're experiencing, the resistance to accepting that you've become someone who can be genuinely okay alone. Because during all these years, his presence validated your solitude. It made it less scary, less empty, less questionable. You could be alone without feeling abandoned because he was there, sharing the space, confirming that inhabited solitude is different from absolute solitude. But now you no longer need that validation. You've learned to distinguish between solitude as emptiness and solitude as fullness. between being alone out of lack of options and being alone by conscious choice. And he detected this change even before you fully recognized it. He felt that you no longer emanated that subtle need for company that had initially attracted him. He realized that your solitude had matured to the point of being self-sufficient. That's why he couldn't stay any longer. Not because he stopped loving you, but because staying would contradict his own nature, both his and yours. Because cats, as guardians of inner solitude, only remain where solitude still needs to be guarded, where there is still vulnerability, neediness, a need for silent protection. When that need transforms into self-sufficiency, when vulnerability becomes strength, when neediness transforms into conscious choice, they move on. And it hurts, because it means that you've lost not only a companion, but also a version of yourself that, however limited it may have been, was familiar, known, predictable. The version that needed to be accompanied to feel safe. The version that depended on witnesses to validate its own existence. The version that sought in others, human or not, confirmation that it was not completely alone in the world. That version died, and with it, died the need that kept the cat around. Zeno would call this metamorphosis necessaria, the necessary transformation that every developing being needs to go through to reach its most authentic form. But he also understood that these transformations always involve mourning. Mourning for the old versions of ourselves, mourning for the bonds that those versions sustained. And perhaps the deepest wound that this experience exposes is this. You discovered that it is possible to be loved conditionally, even by an animal. Not conditionally in the sense of moral judgment, but conditionally in the sense of existential function. He loved you to the extent that you needed to be loved in that specific way. And when you stopped needing it, his love found other paths, other beings, other ways to manifest itself. This does not diminish the authenticity of what you experienced. It doesn't make the connection that existed any less real, but it reveals a truth about the temporary nature of all bonds. They exist to serve mutual growth, and when that growth demands separation, separation becomes an expression of love, not a denial of it. But you still don't know how to process this truth. You still don't know how to simultaneously honor the pain of loss and the gratitude for the evolution that this loss represents. You still don't know how to celebrate having become someone who no longer needs to be accompanied, when part of you misses being the person who needed it. Do you remember the first time you realized that something had changed in the dynamic between you? It was subtle. Maybe he started spending more time in the garden, or choosing corners of the house where you didn't usually stay. Nothing dramatic, nothing that could be interpreted as rejection. Just a silent adjustment of distance. And you, still not understanding what was happening, may have tried to regain the old closeness. You offered special treats, called more often, created situations that in the past resulted in moments of connection. But something had changed, not in him specifically, but in the invisible chemistry that governs the bonds between beings, in the frequency that you emitted together. Zeno observed that when a being transforms, the entire energy field around it reorganizes to reflect that transformation. And perhaps that's what you witnessed during those weeks or months before the definitive disappearance, a gradual reorganization that prepared both of you for separation. He wasn't consciously saying goodbye. He was following impulses that came from levels deeper than consciousness, impulses that responded to the change in the quality of your presence, in the texture of your silence, in the nature of your solitude, because you had learned something you didn't know before. How to be present for yourself completely, how to inhabit your own company without missing something external to fill internal spaces. Do you remember that afternoon when you were reading in silence, completely absorbed, and realized that you hadn't thought about him for hours? Not out of forgetfulness or negligence, but because you were genuinely complete at that moment. You didn't need his presence to validate or enrich the experience. And perhaps it was at that moment, when you realized that you could be alone without feeling lonely, that he received the first sign that the bond between you was transforming. Not weakening necessarily, but changing in quality. From mutual dependence to mutual respect. From shared need to shared freedom. He started going out for longer periods, to explore territories that had previously not aroused his interest. as if he were responding to calls that you couldn't hear, but that he perceived clearly. And perhaps that was exactly what was happening. Perhaps he was hearing the call of another being in another place, who needed the kind of silent company that he knew how to offer, who was going through the development phase that you had already overcome. The Stoics believed that nothing in the universe is wasted, that all energy, all care, all love finds its way to where it is most needed. And your cat, following this cosmic economy, may have detected that your energy of care could be better applied elsewhere, not because you no longer deserved his care, but because you no longer needed it in the same intense and constant way. During those last days before the disappearance, did you notice something different in his eyes? A quality of farewell that you didn't know how to interpret at the time, but that now in retrospect seems clear, as if he were memorizing you. Not the person you had been when you met, but the person you became. The person who had finally learned to be her own company. And perhaps it was that look of recognition, of silent pride, of love that no longer needs to manifest itself through physical proximity, that functioned as a real farewell between you. Zeno taught that true love liberates what it loves, and your cat, through that final look, freed you from the dependence on his presence. He gave you back the ability to be alone without feeling that something was missing. On the morning you woke up and he was no longer there, part of you already knew. Not consciously perhaps, but on some deeper level, you had prepared for that absence. Because you had learned the lesson he had come to teach, that solitude can be fullness, that silence can be company, that being alone can be a choice, not a punishment. And once that lesson was learned, his physical presence became redundant, not useless, not unwanted, but unnecessary for your emotional well-being. He didn't run away from you. He followed the natural flow that governs all healthy relationships. Stay while there is mutual growth, leave when growth demands freedom. And he left you with the greatest gift he could offer, the certainty that you can be okay alone. Not out of resignation or giving up, but out of conscious and mature choice. Zeno taught that the Logos, the universal reason that governs all things, operates through a wisdom that transcends our immediate understanding, but that always seeks the perfect balance of the whole. What seems like loss to the part reveals itself as gain for the whole, he observed. And perhaps that is the perspective you need to adopt to truly understand the disappearance of your cat. He didn't disappear out of whim, out of wild instinct, or out of ingratitude. He responded to the natural movement of the Logos that determines where each energy should be applied, so that the universe maintains its hidden harmony. During all those years that he remained by your side, he fulfilled a specific function in your development, teaching you to be comfortable with your own solitude, to find peace in silence, to discover that you can be your own company. The wise master leaves when the disciple no longer needs teaching, the philosopher reflected, and your cat, following that instinctive wisdom, recognized that you had learned the fundamental lesson about emotional autonomy, that you had developed the ability to be alone without feeling abandoned, to inhabit silence without interpreting it as emptiness, to occupy spaces without needing witnesses to validate your presence. And once that ability was developed, his permanence would be not only unnecessary, but potentially limiting. It could prevent him from applying his energy of care where it is most needed, and it could prevent you from fully experiencing your new capacity for emotional self-sufficiency. That's why he left. Not out of abandonment, but out of wisdom. Not out of lack of love, but out of love that understands when loving means liberating. Zeno would call this oikeiosis, the natural process through which each being finds its appropriate place in the cosmic order and acts according to that place. Your cat found his appropriate place, no longer by your side, but in some other point in the universe where his silent presence can serve someone who still needs to learn what you have already learned. And you found your appropriate place, capable of being alone without being lost, capable of inhabiting silence without fear, capable of being your own source of company and comfort. This is no small achievement. It is one of the greatest victories that a human being can achieve: genuine emotional independence. Not the independence that comes from the fear of connecting, but the independence that comes from the ability to connect from one's own fullness. Only he who does not need can truly choose. Zeno taught, and now you can choose company, human or animal, out of desire, not out of need, out of inner abundance, not out of emotional neediness. And this completely transforms the quality of the bonds you can form, because when you don't desperately need someone to feel complete, you can love that someone more freely, more generously, more authentically. You can offer presence without demanding presence in return. You can give affection without the anxiety of not receiving enough affection. You can connect without the constant fear of being abandoned. The disappearance of your cat was not a loss, it was graduation. It was the confirmation that you have reached a level of emotional maturity that makes possible healthier, more balanced, more sustainable relationships. And perhaps, just perhaps, if you can see it from this perspective, you can feel not only longing, but also gratitude. Gratitude for having had a companion who loved you enough to leave when his permanence no longer served your growth, who taught you not only to be comfortable with your own company, but also to trust in the wisdom of the universe that governs all encounters and all separations. Zeno would say that this trust is the mark of the true sage, accepting that there is a greater order operating through all experiences, including those that initially seem painful or incomprehensible, and that our task is not to resist this order, but to learn to flow with it, recognizing that it always seeks our deepest development, even when the methods it employs challenge our immediate understanding. Your cat was an agent of that order, and his disappearance was the natural conclusion of a mission accomplished with perfection. He didn't come back. And perhaps now you understand that he was never meant to come back. That from the first day he appeared in your life, he was fulfilling a specific function in the universal LOGOS to teach you that you can be okay alone. And that once that function was fulfilled, his permanence would be a contradiction to his own nature. Zeno wrote, "Everything that comes has a purpose, and everything that goes has fulfilled its purpose, and your cat fulfilled his purpose with a perfection that only now you can recognize. During all those years of silent company, he was preparing you for this moment, for the discovery that you don't need witnesses to validate your existence. You don't need constant company to feel accompanied. You don't need others to fill spaces that, in reality, are already complete. The silence of the house now is not emptiness, it is fullness. It is the confirmation that you have learned to inhabit your own life completely and authentically. True freedom comes when we stop depending on external factors for our inner peace," the philosopher taught. And your cat gave you that freedom, not through presence, but through absence that forces you to discover that you already possess everything you need to be okay. You looked for him for weeks, maybe months. You put food outside, left windows open, kept hoping he would come back. But deep down, from the first day of absolute silence, you already knew that he had left for a destination that did not include return. Because he didn't go away. He returned. He returned to the universal flow from which he had temporarily left to fulfill a specific mission in your life. And now that the mission is complete, he can go where the LOGOS determines that his energy is most needed, perhaps to accompany another being who is beginning the journey of learning to be alone, perhaps to fulfill a completely different function in the cosmic economy that governs all existences. You don't need to know. You don't need to understand. You just need to accept that there is a wisdom operating through all experiences, including separations, that always seeks the deepest development of all involved. And trust that, just as he appeared exactly when you needed to learn the lesson he came to teach, other beings will appear exactly when you need to learn new lessons. But for now, for this period of your life, you can be alone. Not out of lack of options, not out of inability to connect, but out of conscious choice of someone who has discovered that solitude can be company, that silence can be conversation, that being alone can be fullness. His disappearance was not abandonment, it was liberation. Liberation from the dependence on external factors for your inner peace. Liberation from the need for witnesses to validate your existence. Liberation from the belief that being alone means being incomplete. And perhaps that is the greatest proof of love that someone can offer. To leave when leaving is necessary so that you discover your own completeness. Zeno would say that this is the nature of true care, not to keep dependent what one loves, but to liberate what one loves so that it finds its own strength. And now you know, you have enough strength to be okay alone. You no longer need to be accompanied by someone who guards your solitude. You have learned to guard your own solitude. His silence was not absence, it was conclusion, the natural conclusion of a cycle that began with dependence and ended with freedom. He didn't leave you, he returned you to yourself. And perhaps there is no greater gift than that. The hidden harmony that Zeno studied so much operated through his presence and operates now through his absence. Both serving the same purpose, your development towards wisdom. And wisdom, according to the Stoics, is the ability to be at peace with what is, understanding that everything that is serves a purpose greater than our immediate understanding. Your cat was a fragment of that wisdom, and now you are too. Like this video, if you've ever felt that strange pain of being abandoned by the one who taught you not to need to be accompanied anymore. Comment if you recognize this silent wisdom of the universe that takes away from us exactly what it taught us not to need anymore. And share with someone who needs to know that some absences are not loss. They are proof that we have learned the lesson. Because in the end, the best teachers are those who leave when we no longer need them.